Buying an investment property can be scary, especially if you're like me and maybe you've bought a house across the country and you didn't even visit the home. And I'm gonna share with you 3 horror stories so that way you don't make those same mistakes that some of these clients made when they bought their rental properties. And if this is the first time you're checking out my channel, my name is Seanu Uyehara, helping you finance your homes all across America, whether you're looking at purchasing, refinancing, buying your first home, an investment property, or even a vacation home. We've got you covered from coast to coast. So let's hop right into the list. Here in Las Vegas, Airbnbs are pretty restrictive. You have to buy them in a certain part of town. They have to be a certain type of property in order to even qualify to be eligible for Airbnb. Now, many investors are flocking here to Vegas specifically to purchase Airbnb so they can get into the short-term rental game. Now, here's the story. There was a client that wasn't forthcoming and actually closed on a property that they turned into a short-term rental. Now, here in Clark County, they actually had people that were working undercover booking rentals, and if you were the owner that you were doing something illegal, they would serve you a fine as you would come to the door. This specific client had an active Airbnb that someone had decided to rent. The tenant was in there for a day or so. They ended up calling and messaging the owner saying, hey, there's a leak at the property. Can you please come to fix it? So the owner went down, knocked on the door. The tenant that was there at the time asked them, hey, are you the owner? And the owner's like, yeah, of course, I'm here to help and fix the leak. And they said, well, this is an illegal Airbnb, and serve them a fine and a notice that they had to cease operations. And they served them the fine that was so big that the homeowner actually had to sell the property to pay off the fine. So make sure if you're looking to get into the short-term rental game here in Las Vegas, you work with an agent who's very knowledgeable about Airbnbs so you don't end up like this guy. Again, here in Las Vegas, rental restrictions are something that not many people know about or even experience across the country. And basically what it is these HOAs that manage some of these larger condo developments, you have to go through the HOA to get an approval to rent your unit out. So I had a client who worked with an agent that sold them this investment property several years ago, and they were expecting to make all this cash flow on the property and they were super excited to get started. However, once they closed on the home, they had no idea that this rental restriction was in place. Once they found out what the process entailed, the wait list in order for their unit to be eligible for a rental was about 2 years out. So this investor that bought this property was intending to create all this cash flow from the beginning. But little did he know that now he'd have to wait 2 years to put his unit into the rental pool to qualify. Again, he didn't want to wait the 2 years, so he ended up selling the property and actually lost money on the deal. Again, this is why I always stress to you, when you're looking at investments, make sure that you're working with both a lender and a realtor who understands investments, and they actually have their own investments themselves so they can keep you out of trouble, like client number 2. And the most important one of all, not knowing your numbers. As an investor, that's pretty much how you're gonna decide whether or not you're gonna purchase the home. It's gotta meet your criteria. Now, if you've been watching my channel, I've been talking about some of the rentals that I bought, and I've bought them on the other side of the country. I haven't even looked at these properties. But for me, it was all about the numbers. And I'm sure that you, as an investor, are thinking the same thing. I need to meet a certain ROI, or I want certain cash flow, but you gotta know what you're getting into. Now, this horror story basically comes down to an investor who was working with a realtor. They wanted to buy a property in another part of the country that they weren't living in. And when they came to me to get pre-approved, we went through the qualifications. They qualified for a loan, no problem. However, once we started to get down into the numbers of what the monthly payment was going to be, it was a lot higher than what they had calculated, because they were actually looking to purchase an investment in Texas. And if you didn't know, Texas property taxes are really high. When you calculate property taxes in Texas, sometimes you're looking at even 2, sometimes even 3%. in order to figure out what that number is. So for example, if you bought a $300,000 home in Texas, you might have a property tax bill upwards of $9,000 a year. Now, when you divide that by 12, you've got almost another mortgage payment that you have to calculate into the actual payment itself. So for this investor, they thought, again, they were gonna make all this cash flow on the property, but once we ran the numbers and we actually looked at some properties and gave them the actual property taxes itself, it was significantly higher than what they had figured. Imagine if they would have bought that investment without understanding what the property taxes were, or even a lender who could even advise them and give them some guidance as to what might make the most sense for their investment strategy. That is why it's super important, like I always say, work with a lender who understands what your goals are, so that way they can recommend the right programs and get you set up for success. I want to make sure to help you get your mortgage right. So make sure to check the description below. There's links to more information. And of course, you can check this playlist out right here to make sure that you guys don't end up like these 3 clients and with those mistakes. My name's Seanu Uyehara. I'll see you on the next video.